Hello everyone, this is one of a series of short interviews that I've been conducting at the Bay Area Alignment Workshop, which is run by FAR.AI. Links to what we're discussing, as usual, are in the description. A transcript is, as usual, available at axrp.net, and as usual, if you want to support the podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/axrpodcast. Well, let's continue to the interview. All right, I'm currently speaking with Anthony Aguirre.
Nice to be here.
For those who aren't as familiar with you and what you do, can you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a theoretical physicist by original training. I still hold a professorship at UC Santa Cruz.
Yep.
And I've studied a whole range of theoretical physics things in the early universe and gravity and foundations of quantum mechanics and all sorts of fun stuff. But about 10 years ago or so, I, as well as another colleague, Max Tegmark, and a few others, sort of started to think about the long-term future and in particular transformative technologies and the role that they would be playing, and decided to start up a nonprofit thinking about transformative technologies and what could be done to steer them in maybe a more favorable direction. At that point, AI was just starting to work a little bit, and things like AGI were clearly decades away, if not centuries in some people's opinion.
Yep.
So this was a more theoretical and pleasantly abstract set of things to think about.
Right.
But nonetheless, we felt like it was coming and started a bunch of activities, and that was the birth of the Future of Life Institute. And I'm now, 10 years later, executive director of the Future of Life Institute, pretty much full-time. And so I've got sort of a split between Future of Life Institute, my academic appointment and my students there, and a couple of other hats that I wear, including Metaculus.
How does Metaculus fit into all of that? Like I imagine once you're both a professor and helping run FLI, I'm surprised you had the time to start this other thing.
Well, I started Metaculus at the same time as FLI, so I didn't know what I was getting into at that point.
Classic way people do things.
Yes. So Metaculus actually started with FLI for a reason, because thinking about the future and how we could steer it in more positive directions, I felt like, well, then we have to know a little bit about what might happen in the future. And conditionally, if we did X and Y, what might that do? And also, so how do we build a ability to make predictions? And also, how do I identify people that are really good at making predictions?
Yep.
And modeling the world? And so it sort of started up at some level to be a thing that would be of service to Future of Life Institute, but also everybody else who's thinking about the future and wants to do better planning and better decision making.
How useful to FLI has Metaculus been?
Surprisingly little, I have found, actually. So I think the big lesson that I've taken from Metaculus is that the ability to say whether, once you've really carefully defined a question like, will X happen by date Y? And you know exactly what X is, and you defined it so that everybody agrees what X is, and so on. Once you've just done that, whether that thing is 70% likely or 80% likely, nobody cares. Like it barely ever matters. Maybe if you were in like something very quantitative, if you were working for a hedge fund or something, you care about 70 versus 80. But at some level, nobody cares, and whether it's 70 or 80 doesn't really change what you do in almost any decision. But the process of getting to the point of knowing exactly what X is and having a well-defined question and keeping track of who makes good predictions and who doesn't, thinking about what I need, what is it that I want to decide, or what decision do I want to take, and what do I need to know in order to make that decision, and turning that into very concrete operational questions that can, happen or not happen.
Yep.
Those things are really valuable.
Right.
So I think the interesting pieces, some to FLI and some elsewhere, haven't been so much the outputs, like the actual predictions, but going through the process of making the questions. And
Gotcha.
If this is what we really want to understand, how do we decompose that into well-defined things that can go on Metaculus, almost independent of how those things actually turn out?
So you say like 70 versus 80 doesn't really matter. I imagine like 10% versus 90% might matter. Does that ever does it ever come up that a thing turns out to be 90% and you thought it was 10, or vice versa?
Very occasionally. I mean, I would say it's rare. I would say like the Ukraine war was one where Metaculus had a much higher prediction than I think most people had. Was right, was useful to some people. Like I think there were some people who actually moved out of Ukraine because of the Metaculus prediction.
Okay.
We felt
That's pretty
good
cool
about that. It's not many people who would take Metaculus that seriously, but I think there are a few. So I think there are some. It's also like 1% versus 10% is also, of course, a huge difference, which is less appreciated among, if you're not thinking about probabilities all the time, but it is also a huge difference. And I think there are some of those. I think a lot of it is also, once the reputation accrues, then it gets taken more seriously. So I think, a lot of people in the AI community take seriously, at some level, Metaculus predictions about AGI arrival, because they, Metaculus does have a track record. They know it's a bunch of people that are high knowledge and thinking really carefully and technically about it.
Right.
And it's a way of accruing, it's a way of aggregating lots of wisdom of the right sort of people. So I think the fact that there's an AGI question that is at 2030 versus 2035 on Metaculus does make quite a big difference, in the sort of things that AI safety is thinking about. Whereas it's, or a probability of 30% versus 70%, say, in human level AGI by date X is a reasonably big deal. I think there are some examples where the outcomes or the outputs really matter. But there are very few where I've said like, oh, I think this is probably like 90% probable, and I put it into Metaculus, and Metaculus is like, no, 10%.
Right.
Usually the numbers are not that surprising.
Fair enough. So before we get into the stuff you do at FLI, we're currently at this alignment workshop being run by FAR.AI. How are you finding the workshop?
The workshop has been enjoyable in the way that these workshops are, which is that lots of people that I like and respect and want to talk to are here. It usually is less about the program than about the actual in-person physical gathering and who you can corner in various breaks. So from that perspective, it's been great. Had great conversations.
Awesome. So let's talk about FLI. So you're currently the executive director. At a high level, what's FLI up to these days?
So FLI is always evolving. I think we started out primarily as a more academic group. We funded the first sort of technical AI safety research grants back in 2015. We also were we were a convener, so we tried to bring together academics and nonprofit people and industry people and and a little bit policymakers and get them talking to each other before any of them were talking to each other.
Yeah, you ran the precursors to these alignment workshops. They were in in nice tropical islands.
Yes,
I went to one of those and it was quite fun.
The Puerto Rico one, probably.
Yeah.
Well, there are two, but probably the second one.
Yep.
So we did a number of convenings, partly for partly to get technical people together, but also partly socially to get different groups together who weren't talking together. Those groups are talking together a lot more now. That they're not in. They're also talking together a lot less than they used to, in the sense that there were lots of heads of labs that you could get in together in one room and have them smiling and agreeing with each other in a way that doesn't really happen nowadays, now that they're sort of bitter rivals and at some level enemies, some of them. So that was a different time. For the last few years, I would say we've been focused first we've gotten more focused on AI as opposed to other transformative technologies. We still have a long history in nuclear, and we are thinking about nuclear issues, but more where nuclear intersects AI, or where bio intersects AI, or where weaponry intersects AI.
Okay.
So AI is obviously like the thing that is looming most quickly in all of our minds. So we've focused on that. I think appropriately. I mean, if it doesn't turn out to be AI, it'll be because there's a quick pandemic first or a nuclear war first, and we'll hope that doesn't happen.
Fingers crossed.
So in terms of AI, we're doing some work still supporting technical research, a lot more work doing policy research and policy engagement and some level of advocacy. So we participated heavily in the EU AI Act. We participated in a number of sessions in the U.S. Congress, like gave testimony on Capitol Hill and part of the Schumer hearings. And so have basically had a presence of really trying to bring expertise about AI safety to policymakers in various forms. So there's that policy sort of experts and and like informative role. We've also taken on some level of a policy advocacy role, I would say, especially starting with the open letter of like early 2023.
Right.
That was a bit more of a strong position that we took. We have taken those before. So we've taken positions on autonomous weapons that we should not be basically developing them. We've taken positions on nuclear weapons, but those were, I would say, less directly contrary to the aims of the major companies that were doing things than the pause letter was. So I think since the pause letter, we've taken a little bit more of a advocacy role with like a point of view about AI and AI risk, and pushed a little bit more for the things that we feel are needed given the level of risk. Yeah.
So just at a high level, what do you think is needed? What policies do you advocate for?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, in our what we've written formally and what you can find on our website, we believe that there should be ultimately a mandatory licensing system for AI systems at the frontier level, and that should require more and more stringent safety guarantees as those systems get more and more powerful, and sort of zero for like very lightweight systems or very narrow systems. We think that at the moment, AGI is being developed in a rather unsafe race dynamic by large unoverseen companies, and that this is not good. So we still call for a pause. We still think we should pause like a GI development now until we have a much better system in place for managing the risks of it. And we also think that you should not develop superintelligence until or unless you can make really strong guarantees, like provable safety guarantees about the system, which are not possible to make now. So we should not be developing superintelligence anytime soon until like safety techniques are radically more capable than they are now. So those are like baseline. We believe that. We are also quite concerned about issues of concentration of power, whether that power is concentrated in a handful of AI companies that have huge economic dominance, or a government that uses AI to, suppress dissent and surveil and all of those things, or in AI itself. So in the sense of like, not necessarily one AI like taking over everything, but just lots of deferring decisions to a network of AI systems so that human sort of decision-making and agency is largely lost.
Talking about the licensing thing first. So you mentioned, some sort of licensing scheme where like for larger models, you have to like, or not necessarily larger, but for more powerful models, you have to like do things to get a license. Like what are you imagining being the requirements for a license?
Yeah, I think, again, it should ratchet up as the systems become more powerful and potentially threatening. But I think, for the systems we have now, so I would say it's sort of the same thing that is happening. There should be evaluations of their capabilities and their risks, but it should be either done or checked by a disinterested third party. And it should be done before the system, there should be a stamp of approval on that before the system is actually deployed. I mean, so the evaluations are often done before the system is deployed, but if they found anything dangerous, it's unclear what would happen at this point. Like, so they should actually be required. They should actually have teeth, and they should involve an independent third party. And this is more or less what we do with every other product that might cause danger in our society. We do it with airplanes, we do it with cars, we do it with drugs. Like everything else, you develop the thing, you have it, you make a case that the thing is safe at some reasonable and quantitatively defined level, and then you roll it out to the consumer. So this is not some crazy new thing. It just feels weird because we've had an unbelievably unregulated tech space. And I think in many ways that has been fine. In some ways it's been problematic. But once we're now getting to systems that are actually potentially quite dangerous, we need to be adopting some of the techniques we've developed for actually dangerous other systems.
So you mentioned in the limit of superintelligence, you would want some sort of like guaranteed, provable guarantees of safety. So to me, this is reminiscent of Yoshua Bengio's line of work. I guess was guaranteed safe AI. There was some position paper.
Yes.
I'm afraid I didn't actually read it, but have you been in contact with them or
Sure. Yeah. So there's a whole program that Max Tegmark has been pushing. Yoshua has been involved in. Steve Alejandro has been pushing. Davidad has his own version of this. So I think there are a few very ambitious programs that say, okay, what would it look like if we to actually have safety when there's a system that is potentially much more intelligent than us? That is not a problem that obviously even has a solution.
Yeah.
Right. Like at first blush, when you say, how do I sort of control or ensure is safe for me a system far more intelligent than me, the most obvious answer is you don't.
Right.
And like if you have 10 kindergartners and they bring in a corporate CEO to help them solve problems for them, there's no sense in which those kindergartners are going to be controlling that CEO. The CEO is just more knowledgeable, more worldly, more wily, more persuasive.
Right.
Everything more effective than the 10 kindergartners. And so I think that's a problem that is unsolvable for those kindergartners.
Okay.
Superintelligence may be an unsolvable problem in that same way. Or it might not. I think we don't know. So I think the requirement should be very high that we really believe that the problem is solved and we can really reassure ourselves that the problem is solved before we go ahead with that, because it's not obvious that the problem is solvable. And I think we're doing something rather unwise by going ahead and assuming that there will be a solution in time to superintelligent alignment or control when it's not at all obvious that even in principle it's possible.
Right.
Let alone that we know how to do it in practice.
I'm wondering, so maybe this relates to just sort of FLI's role as a research funder. So you guys support a bunch of PhD fellowships. I guess you also run grants rounds. Yeah, I'm wondering, like, is there a particular focus in the kinds of work that you want to fund, or is it like more broad-based?
It's pretty broad. And we have we decide on different things as priorities and then try to put, both institutional resources and fiscal resources behind them. So I think the AI safety fellowships are part of the idea that we need to build in technical AI safety.
Yep.
And lots of people agree with that, and that's our contribution to that.
Yeah.
We just ran a request for proposals on concentration of power, because we feel like that's something that is like lots of people talk about and worry about, but aren't really doing much about. It's certainly not at the research level.
Right.
So wanted to have looking for things that aren't necessarily going to happen by themselves and really do need independent or philanthropic dollars. So that's an example of that. Others could be more niche technical projects. So we're funding things in like compute security and governance now, things that probably will come into being on their own, but probably much later than we would like them to.
Okay.
So there, the idea is to accelerate the timeline for things that everybody agrees are good. Like everybody agrees security is good to first approximation.
Right.
But it won't but everybody also agrees that our security is in most cases.
Yeah.
So trying to make that better for high powered AI. So it's a mixture of different things, like where we decide that there's some thing that we see as underfunded but is important, and just design some sort of program to do that.
One thing you said is that you support fiscally as well as in some other way. Like I forget what exactly you said.
Yeah. So we give away grants, but we also do joint programs with things, or Future of Life Institute also has a sister organization, Future of Life Foundation.
Right.
The role of which is to incubate new organizations. So that will look like seed funding, but also looks like finding leadership and designing what the institution does and providing, operational support in early days and things like that. Or we might have an organization that we're collaborating with, and we might help them out with communications or, coordinate with them on media production or whatever. So that's the sort of thing. Just like some of our institutional resources going to help some other project that other people are doing.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And the Future of Life Foundation, am I right that that's somewhat of a new organization?
That's pretty new. It now has a staff of 2. just recently doubled. So that's just getting started really. But it is sort of fully launched one thing, which is Karma, the don't ask me what the acronym means because I will get it wrong.
Okay.
But it is a technical AI policy shop that Richard Malla is leading.
Okay.
It has also contributed to taken over a project that was originally funded out of Future of Life Institute now called Wise Ancestors, which is looking at non-human extinction and what we can do about that, and can we sort of back up some of the genetic data to the hard drive, as well as prevent some things from going extinct. So that's a little bit of a different angle on extinction and X risk, but one that we found could be interesting and useful. And there's like a bunch of things in the hopper, but yeah, it's just getting started.
Gotcha. If there's some founder who's like maybe interested in doing something and is curious like what kinds of organizations you want to kickstart, is there a list on some website that they can look at?
There's not a public list, but I would totally encourage them to get in touch with either myself or Josh Jacobson. The FLF.org will give them the contact information for that. So yeah, we're eager to meet people who are excited about founding new organizations and would love to talk with them about what they're thinking, what we're thinking, if there's an interesting match there.
Great. Well, thanks very much for chatting with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
This episode was edited by Kate Brunotz, and Amber Dornace helped with transcription. The opening and closing themes are by Jack Garrett. Financial support for this episode was provided by the Long-Term Future Fund, along with patrons such as Alexei Malafeyev. To read a transcript of the episode, or to learn how to support the podcast yourself, you can visit axrp.net. Finally, if you have any feedback about this podcast, you can email me at feedback@axrp.net.